Not pooling, not dramatic, just there, in thin streaks across the floorboards leading toward the cellar door, as if someone had tried to wipe it away with bare hands and given up halfway. The wood grain had drunk it in, leaving rust-colored shadows that caught the morning light filtering through the broken window. Nobody had told me about blood. They'd said disturbance. They'd said women's troubles. They'd said I should come quickly because the Johnson property had gone silent, and silence in a house with 5 wives was never natural. I'm Samuel Brennan, Circuit Magistrate for the Western Territories, and I'd seen my share of frontier madness. Men who ate their horses during hard winters. Women who walked into snowstorms holding their dead babies. The wilderness did things to people that civilization couldn't account for. But the Johnson house, standing alone on that ridge with its windows like closed eyes, felt different even from a distance. The smell hit me before I reached the porch. Copper and spoiled meat and something else. Something sweet and chemical that made my throat close. My horse refused to go closer, pulling against the reins until I had to tie her to a fence post 50 yards out. Smart animal. She knew. The front door stood open. Not thrown wide, not broken, just open as if someone had walked through it and forgotten doors were meant to close. Inside, the silence had texture. It pressed against my eardrums like cotton soaked in something thick. I could hear my own heartbeat, the creak of my boots on the threshold, the dry click of my throat when I swallowed. Elias Johnson? My voice fell flat in that space, absorbed by the walls. I'm here on behalf of the territorial magistrate. There's been concern from your neighbors. No answer. But I could feel eyes on me, not from ahead but from above. The ceiling timbers groaned softly, as if something heavy had shifted its weight. The parlor looked normal at first glance. Bible open on the table, candles burned down to stubs, chairs arranged in a perfect circle. Then I saw the fingernail scratches on the chair arms, deep enough to split the wood. All 5 chairs, identical gouges. Someone had gripped them hard enough to bleed. I found the blood later, dried brown crescents under each seat where it had dripped. On the wall, framed in neat cross-stitch, hung a sampler that read, "The Lord watches over the faithful." Someone had embroidered beneath it in different thread, messier stitches. But what watches the Lord? My skin went cold. I moved through the house slowly, documenting. It's what I'd been trained to do, observe, record, report. The kitchen held 5 plates of untouched food, the meat green with rot, flies buzzing in lazy circles. 5 cups of water, undisturbed except for the dust that had settled on their surfaces. 5 napkins folded identically beside each plate. The precision of it felt wrong, theatrical, like a stage set waiting for actors who would never arrive. The bedrooms upstairs were worse. 5 separate rooms, 5 perfectly made beds. But the walls, God, the walls. Someone had written on them in what looked like dried blood, though my hands shook too much to check closely. Not words, exactly. Repeated phrases, over and over, covering every available surface. He promised the hunger would stop. He promised the hunger would stop. He promised the hunger would stop. In the second room, we were supposed to be enough. In the third, it speaks in his voice, but it is not him. In the fourth, the cellar door must stay closed. In the fifth, numbers. Just numbers, thousands of them, scratched into the plaster with something sharp. They started at 1 and climbed higher and higher, growing more frantic, more desperate, until they covered the ceiling itself. The final number, written so hard it had cracked the plaster, 1347. I stood in that room, staring up at those numbers, and felt something shift in my understanding. This wasn't madness. This was documentation. Someone had been counting something. Days. Prayers. Victims. The cellar door waited at the end of the hall, painted black, fitted with 3 separate locks. All three hung open, their hasps bent as if they'd been forced from the inside. I should have left then, filed my report, brought back a dozen men with rifles and torches. But I could hear something from behind that door. Not a voice, not quite. A wet, rhythmic sound, like breathing through fluid-filled lungs. And underneath it, so faint I might have imagined it, whispering. The same whispering, I realized with creeping horror, that the neighbors had mentioned in their reports. The sound that had started 3 months ago, after Elias Johnson returned from his pilgrimage to the mountains. The sound his wives had complained about before they stopped complaining about anything at all. I put my hand on the cellar door, and the whispering stopped. In the absolute silence that followed, I heard footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the attic floor. 1 set, then 2, then 3, 4, 5, all moving in perfect synchronization, all heading toward the attic stairs. That's when I understood that the house wasn't empty at all. The wives were still here. If you are not yet registered with Soul Whispers, now is the time. Because what I'm about to tell you, what I found in that house, it doesn't stay contained in words. It spreads, and you need to know how to recognize it when it reaches you. Let me go back, because the horror didn't start when I walked through that door. It started 3 months earlier when a traveling merchant named Thomas Wick stopped at the Johnson property to water his horses and never left. His wagon was found 2 days later, horses still hitched, goods untouched. Thomas himself was sitting on the driver's bench, hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead. When the search party approached, he turned to look at them with eyes that didn't blink, didn't focus. His lips moved, repeating the same phrase over and over. They need to feed it. They need to feed it. They need to feed it. He died 3 days later, still repeating those words, his throat torn raw from speaking them. The territorial governor wanted it investigated quietly. Elias Johnson was a respected man, a pillar of the frontier religious community. He'd been among the first settlers in the region, building his property through what everyone called divine providence and hard work. His 5 wives, taken legally under frontier marriage customs, were known for their devotion, their silence, their perfect obedience. Nobody questioned how a man who owned no slaves and employed no workers managed such a large property. Nobody asked why he kept his wives isolated, why they never attended social gatherings, why they only appeared in town once a month to purchase supplies, always moving in a silent line behind their husband. Nobody wanted to question Elias Johnson because Elias Johnson held the deeds to half the county through loans he'd extended during hard times. Questioning him meant questioning the foundation of the entire settlement. But Thomas Wick's death changed things. A madman on the road could be ignored. A respected merchant driven insane after visiting a prominent citizen's home, that demanded answers. I'd been given 3 days to investigate and file a report. The governor had been clear. Find natural causes, fever, bad water, spoiled food. Give me something I can write in the official record. Natural causes. Right. I'd arrived at the property on a Tuesday morning, under a sky so clear and blue it hurt to look at. The Johnson house sat on a ridge overlooking a valley of tall grass that moved in waves when the wind touched it. Beautiful country. Empty country. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles south, and they'd reported hearing strange sounds at night, hymns sung in unison, lasting for hours, always ending abruptly at midnight. When I asked what kind of hymns, the neighbor's wife had gone pale. The kind that sound like they're coming from underwater, she'd said. The kind that make you want to plug your ears and pray it stops. I'd written that down in my notes, thinking it was superstition, frontier anxiety, the usual fears that cropped up in isolated places. Now, standing in that house with those scratched walls and that open cellar door, I understood she'd been describing something real. The footsteps above me had stopped. The house held its breath. I pulled my pistol, a ridiculous gesture, but it made my hand steadier. and called up the stairs. "I'm a representative of the territorial government. If anyone's in this house, show yourself. You're not in trouble. I'm here to help." The silence stretched. Then, from the attic, a voice. "We're beyond help, Magistrate Brennan." My blood went ice cold. The voice was female, cultured, perfectly calm, and it knew my name. "Who's speaking?" I kept my voice level, professional. "All of us." A different voice this time, higher pitched with a slight accent I couldn't place. "We speak together now. It's easier that way. Less confusing." "Come down. Let me see you." "You don't want to see us, sir." A third voice, this one cracking with barely suppressed laughter. "We're not fit for company. We've changed." "Changed how?" Silence. Then all 5 voices speaking in perfect unison, the words overlapping into a single sound that made the hair on my neck stand straight up. "We learned what lies beneath." The attic door opened. I could hear it, the hinges screaming, wood scraping against wood. Footsteps on the stairs, descending slowly, still in perfect synchronization, still moving as one. I backed toward the front door, keeping my pistol raised, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I'm an officer of the law, trained to document, to observe, to bring order to chaos. I stood my ground. 5 women appeared at the top of the staircase. They'd been beautiful once. I could see it in the bone structure, the carefully maintained hair, the quality of their ruined dresses. Now they looked like something that had been preserved badly, like meat left in a cellar too long. Their skin had a gray cast, pulled tight over their skulls. Their eyes were open too wide, pupils dilated until barely any color showed. They moved together, right feet forward, left feet forward, like puppets controlled by the same strings. But it was their mouths that made me almost drop my gun. Their lips were moving constantly, silently, forming words I couldn't hear. All 5 of them, same words, same rhythm, never stopping. "Mrs. Johnson," I addressed the woman at the front, the oldest. "I'm Magistrate Brennan. I need to ask you some questions about—" "We know why you're here." They spoke in unison again, that horrible layered voice. "You want to know what happened. You want to understand. But understanding is the first step toward becoming." "Becoming what?" They smiled. All 5, same smile, same expression, showing too many teeth. "Listeners." "Where is your husband? Where is Elias?" The smiles faded. The women looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them, then back to me. "Feeding," they said. "Feeding what? Would you like to see?" The oldest woman, Martha Johnson, I remembered from the records, age 34, Elias's first wife, descended another step. The others followed in perfect formation. "Would you like to understand what we've understood? It's quite beautiful once you stop fighting it. Stay where you are." I raised my pistol higher. "I'm ordering you to remain—" "You can't shoot us all before we reach you," Martha said, her voice suddenly clear, suddenly individual. For a moment, genuine emotion flickered across her face, terror, rage, grief. "And even if you could, it wouldn't matter. We're not the ones you should fear." "Then who?" "The one who answers prayers." She took another step. "The one who grants wishes. The one who lives in the deep places and hungers for what we have." "And what do you have?" "Souls, Magistrate Brennan." Another step. Fresh, untainted, full of fear and hope and all those delicious human flavors. That's what it wants. That's what Elias promised to provide, in exchange for prosperity, for success, for everything a righteous man could desire. My throat went dry. "You're telling me your husband made a deal with—" "Don't say its name." All 5 voices again, sharp with warning. "It hears its name. It comes when called." I was at the door now, my back against the frame, nowhere left to retreat. The women had reached the bottom of the stairs, fanning out, surrounding me. Their lips still moved in that constant silent prayer, but their eyes, God, their eyes were pleading, begging me to understand something they couldn't say out loud. "How do I stop this?" I asked. Martha's face crumpled. For just a second, the woman she'd been showed through the thing she'd become. "You can't," she whispered. "It's already inside us, inside the house, inside the land. Elias fed it for so long, kept it so strong, that now it's part of everything." "Where is Elias?" She pointed toward the cellar door. "Is he alive?" In a manner of speaking. Her smile returned, bitter and broken. "He learned too late that the thing he worshipped doesn't distinguish between offerings and worshippers. To it, we're all just meat and belief, waiting to be consumed." The whispering started again. Not from the women, not from the cellar, from the walls themselves, from the air, from inside my own skull. Soft and insistent, speaking in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. It promised things. Terrible, wonderful things. I ran. Dignity abandoned, training forgotten, I bolted through that door and didn't stop until I reached my horse. The animal was wild-eyed, foam on her mouth from fighting her tether. I cut her loose and we ran together, neither of us daring to look back at the house on the ridge, but I could feel it watching. All the way back to town, through every mile of empty grassland, I felt its attention on my back like a physical weight, and the whispering followed me home. I filed my report that evening, hands still shaking. Severe mental disturbance among the Johnson women. Possible poisoning from contaminated well water or spoiled provisions. Recommend quarantine and medical evaluation. The governor read it, frowned, and asked the question I'd been dreading. "Did you find Elias Johnson?" "No, sir." "Did you search the cellar?" My silence was answer enough. He sighed, set the report aside, and poured us both whiskey. "Samuel, I've known you for 6 years. You're the most rational man I've ever met. You don't believe in ghosts or demons or any of that frontier superstition. So tell me what really happened out there." I drank the whiskey. It didn't help. "Something's wrong with that house, Governor. Something beyond medical explanation. Those women, they're not sick. They're changed. Fundamentally altered by something that lives." I stopped, hearing how I sounded. "That lives where?" "Under the house, in the cellar, in the ground itself." The words came out in a rush. Elias Johnson found something in those mountains, or something found him, and he's been feeding it for years. That's why his property prospers when everyone else struggles. That's why his wives never leave. They're not wives, they're offerings that lasted longer than the others. The governor's face had gone very still. "What others?" That's when I remembered the numbers. 1, 8, and 47. Scratched into the ceiling with such desperate force that the plaster had cracked. "How many people have gone missing in this territory over the last 10 years? I asked. He didn't want to answer. I could see him fighting it, not wanting to connect those dots. Finally, 70, 80? It's frontier country, Samuel. People disappear, they get lost, they freeze, they're killed by natives or animals or simple bad luck. Check the dates. Check the records against the Johnson property records. See if there's a pattern." "You're asking me to accuse a respected citizen of serial murder based on, what, a number on a wall? The ravings of sick women? I'm asking you to investigate before more people disappear." He stood, walked to his window, looked out at the dark street. "There's a circuit preacher coming through next week, Reverend Blackwood out of Boston. He's handled cases like this before. Spiritual disturbances, mass hysteria, that sort of thing. I'll ask him to visit the Johnson property, perform a blessing, calm things down. Governor, that's my decision." He turned back to me, and his eyes were hard. "You did good work out there, Samuel. Nobody's questioning that. But I can't authorize military action against a property owner based on speculation. Get me proof, something concrete, something I can show to the Territorial Council, and I'll act. Until then, we handle this quietly." I left his office knowing the conversation was pointless. Proof was buried in that cellar, feeding something that didn't leave evidence. Proof had been counted and scratched into walls by women driven mad by the truth. But I was an officer of the law. If the governor wanted proof, I'd get him proof. The town's archive was kept in the basement of the church, dusty ledgers recording every land transaction, every marriage, every death for the last 20 years. I spent 3 days down there, candle burning low, comparing dates. What I found made my blood run cold. Elias Johnson had arrived in the territory in the spring of 1797. Within 6 months, he'd purchased 5,000 acres of prime farmland at a price so low it should have been impossible. The seller, a widow named Catherine Brooks, had disappeared shortly after the sale. Moved back east to live with family, the record stated. Except Catherine Brooks had no family back east. I found her marriage certificate, her husband's death notice, her census entry listing her as alone, no living relatives. Over the next 10 years, 23 people had sold land to Elias Johnson or borrowed money from him. 12 of them had disappeared within 6 months of the transaction. The records always listed a reason: returned to previous residence, moved to territories unknown, died of natural causes, body released to family. Moti. But when I cross-referenced with church burial records, I found something chilling. None of those natural deaths had resulted in a funeral. Nobody had seen the bodies. The graves marked with their names were empty. I knew because I went to the cemetery at midnight with a shovel and checked. Then I found the marriage records. Elias Johnson had married his first wife, Martha, in 1798. Standard frontier marriage, nothing unusual. But the subsequent marriages, Sarah in 1799, Rebecca in 1801, Catherine in 1803, Elizabeth in 1805, all followed the same pattern. Young women, no family, desperate circumstances. And before each marriage, another woman associated with the Johnson property had moved away. 5 wives, but at least 9 marriages in the records. The others hadn't moved away. They'd been replaced. I was organizing this evidence, preparing to present it to the governor, when a knock came at my door. Late night, the kind of knock that meant trouble. It was Martha Johnson. She stood on my porch in the moonlight, wearing a clean dress, hair neatly arranged, looking almost normal except for her eyes. Those eyes were still wrong, still too wide, still seeing things I couldn't. Magistrate Brennan. Her voice was her own again. Not that horrible chorus. May I come in? Every instinct screamed no, but I'm trained to gather testimony, to hear witnesses. I stepped aside. She walked past me into my study, moving carefully, as if her body wasn't quite under her control. When she sat, she gripped the chair arms hard. I could hear the wood creak, and her lips started that constant silent movement again. I came to give you the truth, she said, before it's too late, before he realizes I've broken enough free to speak alone. I'm listening. She closed her eyes. Tears ran down her face, but her expression remained calm. I was 20 years old when I married Elias. Beautiful, naive, full of faith. He was older, established, seemed kind. I thought God had blessed me with a good husband. When did you learn otherwise? Our wedding night. Her eyes opened, focusing on something I couldn't see. He took me to the cellar. Said there was something I needed to meet, something that had made all his success possible, something that required maintenance. My hands were suddenly cold. What did you see? At first, nothing. Just a cellar, old and damp, smelling of earth. Then he opened a door I hadn't noticed, a door in the floor, with stairs leading down into darkness. And from that darkness came a voice. Saying what? Nothing. Everything. Words that bypassed my ears and spoke directly into my soul, promising eternal comfort if I would just submit, just accept, just become part of something greater than myself. She was shaking now, her whole body trembling. I tried to run. He stopped me, held me at the top of those stairs and told me what his first wife had learned. Once you hear the voice, you belong to it. Fighting only makes the transition more painful. His first wife. You're his first wife. No. She looked at me directly. I'm his fourth. The others couldn't survive what it does to you, what it plants inside your mind. They died screaming, or they threw themselves into wells, or they simply stopped breathing one night. I learned to endure. I learned to let it speak through me without breaking. That's why I lasted. And the others? Sarah, Rebecca, Catherine, Elizabeth. We're all fourth wives, Magistrate, all survivors of the wives who came before, the ones who couldn't adapt, who fought too hard, who tried to warn others. She leaned forward and I could smell something rotten on her breath. Do you want to know how many women Elias Johnson has married? I thought of the number on the ceiling, 1847. Tell me. I've stopped counting. But we all remember the names. All of us who survived long enough to become permanent. We hear them sometimes, the ones who came before, whispering from beneath the cellar floor. They're still down there, you see. All of them. Because it doesn't just consume bodies, it collects them, preserves them, uses them. For what? To grow, to spread, to create more spaces like the Johnson cellar. More places where it can reach through from wherever it lives. She stood abruptly, moving toward my window. It's ancient, Magistrate. Older than the mountains, older than the land itself. The native tribes knew about it. That's why they wouldn't settle in that valley, why they warned the first colonists to stay away. But men like Elias don't listen to warnings. They see opportunity. How did he find it? He went looking. That's the thing about men like Elias. They're not content with honest work and slow success. They want everything, immediately, regardless of cost. So when he heard stories about a place in the mountains where wishes came true, where prayers were answered with immediate results, he went searching. She turned back to me, and in the lamplight, I could see how thin she'd become, how her skin stretched over her bones like paper. He found a cave, deep underground, where the air smells like copper and old meat. And in that cave, something spoke to him. It offered him everything he wanted, wealth, respect, a legacy that would outlast his natural life. All it asked in return was regular offerings, regular feeding. Women. Not just women, anyone vulnerable, anyone alone, anyone who wouldn't be immediately missed. The land deals, the loans, they were all hunting strategies. He'd find people desperate enough to deal with him, then make them disappear. For years he'd bring them to the cellar, take them down to that door in the floor and let it consume them. I felt sick. And you knew. All 5 of you knew, and you helped him. Her expression twisted into something between rage and despair. We tried to stop him. God, how we tried. We refused, we fought, we attempted to run. But you don't understand what it does to you once you've heard its voice. It plants something in your mind, something that grows and spreads until you can't distinguish your own thoughts from its desires. We didn't help him willingly. We were made into extensions of it, tools it uses to lure more prey. Then why are you here? Why warn me? Because 3 months ago, something changed. She was crying openly now, though her voice remained steady. Elias went too far. He tried to offer it something it didn't want, his own son. I went very still. I didn't know he had a son. Nobody did. We kept him hidden, raised him in secret, protected him from what we'd become. Jacob was supposed to be our redemption, proof that something good could come from that cursed house. Her voice broke, but Elias saw him as just another offering, another way to maintain the bargain. What happened? It rejected him. For the first time in 20 years, it refused an offering. And when Elias tried to force the issue, tried to push Jacob through that door anyway, she stopped, shuddering. It took Elias instead. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. That's why you're free now. That's why you could come here alone. Partially free. The thing in my head is quieter now, less insistent, but it's not gone. It's never gone. She crossed to me, grabbed my hands with shocking strength. Her skin felt like ice. You have to stop this, magistrate. You have to find a way to seal that door, to trap it back underground where it belongs. Because without Elias to control the feeding schedule, it's getting hungry, and when it gets hungry, it stops waiting for offerings to be brought down. It comes up. She nodded. We can't hold it much longer. The 5 of us, we've been using our bond with it to keep it contained, to prevent it from spreading beyond the property. But we're weakening. Every day it gets stronger and we get weaker. Soon it won't need the cellar at all. It'll be able to walk in daylight, to take whatever forms it wants, to hunt through the entire territory. How do I stop something like that? I don't know, but there might be answers in Elias's journals. He documented everything, every aspect of his bargain. They're in his study, locked in a safe behind his desk. The combination is... She gasped, doubling over. Her lips started moving faster, that silent prayer becoming violent. Martha, what's happening? It knows, she whispered. It knows I'm here, that I've said too much. It's pulling me back. She straightened, and her eyes had changed, no longer showing any trace of humanity. Such a helpful little wife running to tattle, but wives who break their vows must be punished. The voice was wrong. Still Martha's vocal cords, but the intonation was wrong, the accent subtly different, like someone doing a poor impression of human speech. I backed away. You're not Martha. Martha is still here. She's watching, screaming, trying to warn you, but I'm louder now. I'm always loudest when I'm feeding. The thing wearing Martha's face smiled. She told you about the journals. That was foolish. Now I need to collect them before you can. Get out of my house. Or what? You'll shoot me. It laughed, and the sound made my windows rattle. This body is already dead, magistrate. Has been for weeks. I'm just wearing it while I wait for something fresher. It moved toward me, too fast, inhuman. I fired my pistol, hit its center mass, saw the fabric bloom red, saw it not even slow down. Then, impossibly, it stopped. Martha's face twisted with effort, and I realized she was fighting it, using some last reserve of will to halt her own body. Run, she gasped, her voice her own again. Find Jacob. He survived. He's hiding somewhere on the property. He's the key. The journals mention... Her face went blank. No more warnings. The thing was in control again, but Martha had given me enough. I ran. Behind me I heard Martha's body crash through my door, heard footsteps following me into the street. But whatever controlled her wasn't used to human limitations. I heard her stumble, heard bones crack as she pushed the body beyond its structural limits. I made it to the church, burst through the doors, and barred them behind me. Outside, Martha's body shambled in circles, that horrible chorus of voices rising from her throat. Come out, little magistrate. Come feed the hunger. Come join the collection. Reverend Talmage found me there at dawn, praying more sincerely than I'd prayed since childhood. Martha's body was gone, leaving only dark stains on the church steps. Samuel. The Reverend's hand on my shoulder made me jump. What happened? I told him everything. All of it. The house, the wives, the thing in the cellar, Martha's testimony. He listened without interrupting, his face growing graver with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, I believe you. You do? I've been a man of the cloth for 30 years. I've seen things that would make you doubt your sanity. And I've heard stories about that valley, about things that lived here long before we came. He helped me to my feet. There's an old woman, lives about 10 miles north. She's from the native tribes that once claimed this territory. If anyone knows how to fight what you're describing, it's her. We don't have time. Then we'd better hurry. He grabbed his coat. Because if what you've told me is true, we have maybe 2 days before that thing breaks containment and spreads through the entire settlement. We rode out within the hour, the Reverend and me, heading toward answers I wasn't sure I wanted. Behind us, smoke began rising from the Johnson property. The wives were burning something, or something was burning them. Have you ever heard something that changed you? Something that got into your head and never left? Drop a comment if you have. I need to know I'm not the only one who understands. The old woman's cabin was little more than a shack, tucked into a grove of trees so thick they blocked out the sun. Reverend Talmage called her Walking Eyes, a name that made sense when I saw her. Her eyes were clouded with cataracts, but she moved through her cabin with perfect precision, as if she could see things invisible to the rest of us. "You've come about the Hunger House," she said before we could speak. Not a question. "You know about it?" I asked. "My people have known about it for 200 years. We called it the Mouth Below. We sealed it with stones and prayers and the bones of our strongest warriors. She poured us tea with steady hands. Then your people came with their axes and their Bibles and their greed, and they broke the seals. They always break the seals. Can it be sealed again?" She laughed, a bitter, knowing sound. "The white man builds a door, thinks he can lock out the dark, but some things don't respect doors. Some things were here before doors existed, before humans gave names to things and pretended that made them controllable. So there's no way to stop it?" "I didn't say that." She set down her teacup and looked at me with those clouded eyes, and I had the unsettling sensation that she was seeing right through me, into me, reading everything I'd ever done and been. But stopping it requires understanding what it is. What it actually is. Not what your limited human mind has decided it must be. It's a demon, a devil, something evil that... No. Her voice cut through my words like a knife. That's your Christian framework trying to make sense of something that existed before Christianity, before religion itself. It's not evil. It has no morality. It's hunger given form, the primal urge to consume and grow and spread. It's what lived in the deep dark before life crawled onto land. And it will still be here long after we're gone. Reverend Talmage leaned forward. "But it can be reasoned with. Elias Johnson made a bargain with it. Elias Johnson was a fool who mistook appetite for intelligence." She stood, moving to a shelf where various bundles hung. Dried herbs, animal bones, things I couldn't identify. "The thing doesn't bargain. It allows you to think you're bargaining while it fattens you up. Elias fed it for 20 years, and every feeding made it stronger, made the bond deeper, until he wasn't serving it anymore. He was part of it. Martha Johnson said it took him, that he tried to sacrifice his son, and it rejected the offering." Walking Eyes went very still. "His son still lives?" "She said he was hiding on the property." "Then that's your answer." She turned back to us, and there was something like hope in her expression. "The boy is pure, untainted by the feeding. If the hunger rejected him, it means he has a quality it can't consume, something that would poison it if it tried." "What quality? Innocence? Love? The refusal to participate in cycles of violence?" She shrugged. "Labels don't matter. What matters is that if the boy exists, he's the key to resealing what his father opened." "How?" She pulled down several bundles, began mixing their contents into a leather pouch. The old seals were made with sacrifice, warriors who willingly gave themselves to bind the hunger, to trap it back in its deep places. But there's another way, older and more dangerous. You can't destroy it, but you can redirect it, turn its hunger inward until it consumes itself. And that requires someone it's already touched, someone who carries its mark but hasn't fully transformed, someone who can go into the deep places where it lives and plant this. She held up the leather pouch, directly into its core. I understood what she was saying. A suicide mission. The person who goes down won't come back, not as themselves. But if they succeed, the hunger turns inward, begins feeding on its own essence. Within a year, maybe less, it starves itself back into dormancy. The mouth below seals itself. And the wives? I thought of Martha, fighting so hard to give me information. What happens to them? If they're too far gone, they die. If there's enough of them left, they might recover. Might. She handed me the pouch. But you need to understand something, Magistrate. This solution only works because of Elias's son. The boy represents something the hunger can't digest. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of breaking the cycle. Use him as your anchor, your protection. Keep him close, and the hunger can't touch you directly. I can't use a child as a shield. Then you'll die. She said it flatly, without emotion. And the hunger will spread. And within 5 years, this entire territory will be a feeding ground, every house a door to its depths. Is your moral comfort worth thousands of deaths? I had no answer to that. Reverend Talmage cleared his throat. What's in the pouch? Seeds, from a plant that only grows in places where many have died. Battlefields, massacre sites, places soaked in desperate fear. They'll take root in the hunger's core and grow in reverse, spreading backwards through time, unmaking every feeding that strengthened it. She looked at both of us, but someone has to plant them. Someone has to go into the mouth and not come back. We left her cabin in silence, the leather pouch heavy in my pocket, the weight of what had to be done settling onto my shoulders like a physical burden. We were halfway back to town when we saw the smoke. Not from the Johnson property this time, from the town itself. We spurred our horses and rode hard, arriving to find chaos. 3 buildings were burning, people running in panic, and in the center of the street stood the 5 Johnson wives, standing in a circle, holding hands, their lips moving in that constant silent prayer. But it wasn't silent anymore. I could hear it now. That whispered language that bypassed ears and spoke directly to the brain. And everyone in the street could hear it too. I saw people stopping mid-stride, their expressions going slack, their mouths beginning to move in unconscious mimicry. It's spreading, Reverend Talmage whispered. God help us, it's spreading through sound. I pulled out my pistol, knowing how useless it was, knowing I had to try anyway. But before I could fire, someone grabbed my arm. A boy, maybe 12 years old, dirt-stained and hollow-eyed, dressed in rags. His grip was surprisingly strong. Don't, he said. They're not doing this. They're trying to contain it. Jacob, I guessed. He nodded. They've been fighting it since Father was taken, using the connection it forced on them to keep it locked in the cellar, but it's getting too strong. They can't hold it much longer. Why are they here? Why did they come to town? Because it's using them as beacons, trying to establish new feeding points. If they stay at the house, it stays contained there. If they leave... He gestured at the spreading chaos, at people beginning to form circles of their own, beginning to sway and chant in mindless repetition. How do we stop it? You can't. Not from out here. Jacob looked up at me with eyes far too old for his age. You have to go in, into the cellar, through the door, down to where it lives, and you have to make it stop wanting to spread. I pulled out the leather pouch. I have what I need, but Walking Eyes said I need you as protection, as an anchor. She's right. It rejected me. It can't feed on me, can't control me. If I'm with you, it can't fully manifest. He took my hand. But we have to go now. Every minute we wait, it gets stronger. I looked at Reverend Talmage. Get everyone into the church. Bar the doors. Don't let anyone leave, and don't let anyone in who's been exposed to the chanting. Samuel, you can't. I'm a magistrate. Protecting citizens is my job. I managed a smile that felt wrong on my face. Pray for me, Reverend. I have a feeling I'm going to need it. Jacob and I rode toward the Johnson property, leaving the burning town behind. The boy didn't speak, but I could feel him trembling against my back, could hear him breathing in sharp, frightened gasps. Jacob, I said gently. "What happened to your father?" "He took me to the cellar." The boy's voice was flat, emotionless. Said I was old enough now to understand the family business, to learn what had made us prosperous. He opened the door in the floor and told me to go down. "But you didn't." I tried. I wanted to be a good son, wanted to make him proud. But when I got close to that door, when I heard the voice coming from below, his grip on my coat tightened. It hurt, like my whole body was rejecting it, like I was allergic to whatever it was. Father got angry, said I was weak, said I needed to overcome my fear. He tried to force you. He grabbed me, started dragging me toward the door, and that's when the mothers stopped him, all 5 of them, moving together, pulling him back. They'd never refused him before. They couldn't. It wouldn't let them. But when he tried to push me through that door, something broke in their connection to it. They chose me over their binding. I could picture it. The 5 women, finally finding a line they wouldn't cross, finally discovering that maternal instinct could overcome even the deepest corruption. "What did it do to your father?" The mothers held him at the edge, and the voice got louder, angrier. It had always taken what Elias offered without question. It thought he was part of its system, an extension of its will. But when he tried to offer something it couldn't consume, it realized he was separate, individual. "Pray." Jacob's voice dropped to a whisper. It dragged him down. I could hear him screaming for hours, screaming and screaming until his voice gave out. And then there was just silence. And then just the whispers. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Don't be. He deserved worse." The boy's voice was cold. "He killed my real mother. My mother's told me she was his second wife, and when she got pregnant she tried to run. He caught her before she could reach the next town, brought her back, and fed her to it. But I survived. The mothers raised me in secret, hid me in the attic, taught me to be quiet when father was home. We'd reached the property. The house loomed against the darkening sky, and I could feel it now. That presence Walking Eyes had described, that primal hunger given form and consciousness. It knew we were coming. It was waiting. "Last chance to stay here," I told Jacob. "I'm coming. This is my fault. If I'd been able to accept the voice, father wouldn't have been taken, the mothers wouldn't be suffering, the town wouldn't be burning. This isn't your fault. You didn't make the choices that led here. Maybe not. But I can make the choice that ends it." He slid off the horse and walked toward the house with the grim determination of someone who'd already accepted death. I followed him inside. The house was worse than before. The walls were sweating something dark and viscous. The air smelled like rotten fruit and burning hair. And the whispering was everywhere, so loud now that I couldn't hear my own thoughts. Jacob took my hand. The moment his skin touched mine, the whispers quieted to a bearable level. He really was protection. We descended to the cellar. The door in the floor stood open, revealing stairs that went down farther than should have been physically possible. The darkness below was absolute, but I could see something moving in it, something vast and patient. "It knows we're here," Jacob whispered. "It's excited. It hasn't had fresh prey in weeks. Let it be excited." I pulled out the leather pouch. "Stay close to me. Don't let go of my hand." We descended into the darkness. The stairs went down for what felt like hours. The air grew colder, denser, pressing against my lungs with each breath. I could hear water dripping somewhere, could hear something else. A wet, rhythmic sound like a massive heart beating. Finally, the stairs ended in a cavern. Not a cellar, not a room. A natural formation, vast enough that my light couldn't reach the walls. The floor was covered in something soft and yielding, and when I looked closer, I realized with horror that it was bodies. Hundreds of bodies, maybe thousands, all perfectly preserved, all pressed together into a carpet of flesh. And they were all breathing. In and out, in perfect synchronization, their chests rising and falling as one. "The collection?" Jacob whispered. "Everyone he ever fed it. It keeps them alive, uses their life force to sustain itself." In the center of the cavern I could see it now. A massive shape, Impossible to describe because my mind kept sliding off it, refusing to accept what I was seeing. It was whole and substance, presence and absence, simultaneously there and not there. The only thing I could focus on was its mouth, if you could call it that, an opening in reality that led somewhere else, somewhere that shouldn't exist. And standing in front of that mouth, or what was left of him, stood Elias Johnson. He'd been partially consumed. His lower half was gone, absorbed into the thing's substance, but his upper body remained intact. His eyes were gone, his mouth was gone, but somehow he was still aware, still screaming silently, his body jerking in endless agony as the thing slowly digested him. "It's punishing him," Jacob said, "for trying to cheat, for thinking he could control it. It's making his death last forever." I realized then what walking eyes had really meant. The hunger didn't just consume, it added. Every victim became part of it, feeding it not just their physical substance, but their consciousness, their memories, their pain. It was an accumulation of suffering, growing stronger with each addition, and I was about to add myself to it. "Jacob," I said, my voice steady despite the terror flooding my system, "I need you to do something for me. When I plant these seeds, when the hunger turns inward, I need you to run. Don't look back, don't try to help, just run until you're off the property. The Reverend will take care of you." "You're not coming back." "No, but that's okay. Some sacrifices need to be made." I squeezed his hand one last time. "Tell your mothers I understand. Tell them they fought as hard as they could. Tell them yourself." Jacob pulled his hand free, and instantly the whispers became deafening, the presence overwhelming. "Because you're not dying today." Before I could stop him, Jacob ran toward the thing's mouth. The hunger lunged forward, that impossible opening widening, ready to consume, and then it stopped. Jacob stood at the edge, his small body radiating something I could almost see, a light that pushed back against the darkness. And the hunger recoiled. "You can't have him," I shouted, understanding what walking eyes had really meant, understanding what Jacob represented. "He's pure. He's untainted by any of this. And as long as he exists, you can't spread, you can't grow, you can't—" That's when I saw the truth. The horrible, complete truth that changed everything. The hunger wasn't trying to consume Jacob. It was trying to protect him. The thing that lived beneath the Johnson house, the entity they'd been feeding for 20 years, wasn't some alien horror from beyond reality. It was Jacob's mother, or what was left of her after Elias had fed her to the original hunger, the real one, the ancient one that Walking Eyes had described. She hadn't been consumed. She'd been transformed, become a new version of it, a mother's desperate love twisted into an insatiable appetite. Every person Elias had fed her hadn't strengthened some demonic entity. They'd been added to her, incorporated into a mother's expanding definition of family. The collection wasn't prisoners, it was children. Hundreds of adopted children, kept alive through terrible means, protected by a mother who no longer understood the difference between love and consumption. The 5 wives weren't victims. They were her helpers. Other mothers she'd welcomed into her ever-growing family, binding them to her so they could help care for all her children, all the lost and broken people she'd collected. And now, we'd come to kill her. Jacob stood at the edge of that mouth, tears streaming down his face. "Mother," he whispered. "Mother, please, you have to let them go. This isn't love anymore. This isn't protection. You're hurting them." The thing that had been his mother shuddered. The breathing bodies around us began to wake, their eyes opening, confusion and terror flooding their faces as they realized where they were, what they'd become. "Jacob." My throat closed. I couldn't finish the sentence, because I understood now what Walking Eyes had really given me. Not a weapon to kill the hunger, but a cure. Seeds that would grow in reverse, unmaking not just the feeding but the transformation itself, returning Jacob's mother to what she'd been before Elias's corruption took root. And if she returned to what she'd been, she'd remember every person she'd consumed, every life she'd ended in the name of twisted love. The guilt would destroy her. That was the real sacrifice. Not death, but awareness. Not ending, but understanding. I'd been given the mercy of poison disguised as salvation. Jacob understood too. I could see it in his eyes, and he made the choice I couldn't. He stepped forward into his mother's embrace, pressing the leather pouch against what might have been her heart, and whispered, "I forgive you." The transformation was instantaneous and terrible. The thing that had been sheltering us, protecting us in its own grotesque way, began to unravel. The collected bodies started falling away, their binding broken, their consciousness slowly returning. And in the center of it all, taking shape for the first time in 20 years, was a woman. She was beautiful and broken, her face twisted with the realization of what she'd done, what she'd become. She reached for Jacob with trembling hands, tried to hold him one last time, but her substance was already dissolving, the reverse-growing seeds consuming her from within. "Jacob," she breathed, her voice weak and human and filled with such grief. "I tried to protect you. I tried to keep you safe from him, from everything. But I became the thing I feared most. I know, Mother. I know." Jacob held her as she faded. "But it's over now. You can rest." She smiled, just for a moment. Then she was gone, dissolving into dust and memory, leaving nothing behind but the hollow cavern and the hundreds of people she'd kept trapped in her definition of love. I grabbed Jacob, pulling him back toward the stairs as the cavern began to collapse. Above us, I could hear screaming. The 5 wives, their binding broken, their minds suddenly their own again after years of forced servitude. We ran up those endless stairs, the darkness collapsing behind us, chasing us toward the light. The house was shaking apart, its foundation literally built on that thing in the cellar, and now that foundation was gone. We burst out into daylight just as the entire structure collapsed inward, sucked down into the earth as if it had never existed. The 5 wives stood in the yard, covered in dust, blinking in the sunlight like newborns. Martha saw us and fell to her knees, sobbing. Not the controlled weeping of the thing that had worn her, but genuine human grief. "Thank you," she gasped. "Thank you for ending it." I realized I was crying too. For Jacob's mother, for the wives, for all the people trapped in that collection, for the twisted love that had turned into horror, for the understanding that sometimes the things we fear most are born from the things we cherish most, corrupted by desperation and loss. The bodies came up over the next 3 days. Not all of them. Some had dissolved too completely to be recovered, but enough to fill the town cemetery twice over. We identified maybe a third. The rest were buried in unmarked graves, remembered only by the nightmares of those who'd carried them out. The 5 wives recovered slowly, incompletely. Sarah never spoke again, though sometimes at night you could hear her humming lullabies to children who weren't there. Rebecca's hair had gone completely white, and she developed a habit of scrubbing her hands raw, trying to wash away stains only she could see. Catherine locked herself in her room and refused visitors, though the Reverend said she was writing, filling journal after journal with memories of the people in the collection, trying to give names to the nameless. Elizabeth simply left one morning, walking into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back. We found her 6 months later living with walking eyes, learning the old ways, trying to understand how to prevent such transformations in the future. Martha stayed in town. She testified before the Territorial Council, giving them every detail of what Elias had done, how he'd found the original hunger and turned his wife into a new version of it through years of systematic abuse and forced feeding. The council declared the Johnson property cursed ground, forbade anyone from building on it, and quietly struck Elias Johnson's name from all official records, as if erasure could undo what had been done. Jacob came to live with me. He didn't speak for the first month, and when he finally did, his first words were, "Do you think she knew?" At the end, "Do you think she understood that I loved her?" "I know she did," I told him. "That's why she let go." But I wasn't sure, because I'd seen her face in those final moments, and what I'd seen wasn't peace. It was relief. Relief that the nightmare was over, that she could finally stop protecting, stop collecting, stop being the monster her love had made her. The town slowly returned to normal, or what passes for normal after you've seen the foundations of reality crack open. People stopped talking about the Johnson incident after a while, the way communities do with trauma too large to process. It became one of those things everyone knew but nobody discussed. Except in the quiet moments, late at night, when the wind moved through the grass and made sounds like whispers. Then people would lock their doors, check on their children, and remember that love without boundaries can become its own kind of hunger. I continued my work as magistrate, but I was changed. Every case I handled, every dispute I mediated, I found myself asking, what desperation drove this person here? What love twisted into something toxic? What protection became prison? Because that's what I'd learned in the Johnson cellar. Evil isn't some external force that corrupts the innocent. It's what happens when good impulses become absolute, when protection becomes control, when love becomes possession. Jacob's mother hadn't started as a monster. She'd started as a woman desperate to save her son from a terrible father. But isolation and abuse, and the original hunger's influence had warped that desperation into something unrecognizable. She'd become a mother who consumed everything she claimed to love, who kept her children alive in a state of living death because she couldn't bear to lose them. And in her twisted logic, she'd thought she was being merciful, thought she was saving them from a worse fate, thought that any life, even one of mindless servitude and slow consumption, was better than death. That's the real horror. Not that monsters exist, but that they're made from the same drives that make us human. Fear, love, the desperate need to protect what we cherish. Walking Eyes visited me once, about a year after the incident. She sat in my study, drinking tea, examining Jacob with those clouded eyes that saw too much. "The boy is still marked," she said finally. "He'll always carry what he saw, what he did. You understand that?" "I do. And you understand what he gave up. He could have let you plant those seeds, could have let you sacrifice yourself while he stayed pure, untainted. But he chose to be the one who forgave, the one who broke the cycle. That kind of choice leaves scars. He's strong. He'll survive. Surviving isn't the same as healing." She set down her teacup. "There's a reason my people sealed the original hunger instead of trying to destroy it. Some things can't be destroyed. They can only be contained, redirected, prevented from spreading. What Jacob's mother became was a new growth from that old root, and there will be others." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "The original hunger is still out there, Magistrate. Still trapped in its deep places, still calling to those desperate enough to listen. And there will always be people desperate enough. Always be men like Elias who think they can control it, who think they can use it without being used. Then what's the point, if it can never be truly stopped?" "The point," she interrupted, "is that people like you and Jacob learn to recognize it. Learn to spot the signs before it's too late. Learn to intervene before desperate love becomes consuming hunger." She stood. "That's why I'm telling you this. Because you've seen it now. You understand what to look for. I'm just a magistrate. I handle land disputes and petty crimes. You're someone who saw the truth and didn't look away. Someone who went into the darkness and came back with a boy who needed saving. That makes you more than just a magistrate." She moved to the door, then paused. There's a town, 3 days' ride west, where people have been disappearing. The locals say it's bandits, but the pattern is wrong. Too selective, too ritualistic. If you care about preventing another Johnson incident, you might want to investigate. She was gone before I could respond, leaving me with the weight of new responsibility. That night I found Jacob in his room, staring out the window at the empty plains. "Samuel?" He didn't turn around. "Do you think there are other people out there? Other children like me, born into families that worship things they shouldn't? Probably. Then we should help them, before their families become like mine. Jacob, I know I'm just a kid. I know I can't actually fight monsters or seal ancient evils, but I can recognize the signs. I can spot families that are too perfect, too isolated, too devoted to fathers who demand absolute obedience." He turned to face me, and his eyes held a determination that made him seem decades older. "I can be the warning you never had." Looking at him then, I understood what walking eyes had really meant. The cycle couldn't be broken by sealing the hunger away. It could only be broken by people who'd survived it deciding to prevent others from suffering the same fate. "All right," I said. "We'll go west. Investigate those disappearances. But Jacob, if we find something, if we discover another family like yours, we do this smart. We don't rush in like heroes. We document. We build evidence. We bring help. Because lone heroes die in cellars." "Exactly." He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him since the incident. "I'm glad you adopted me, Samuel." "I didn't adopt you, you're my father now, in all the ways that matter. And that means protecting me without consuming me, guiding me without controlling me, loving me without possession." His smile faded into something more serious. "That means letting me be part of this, even when it scares you." He was right, and that terrified me more than anything in that cellar had. But fear without action is just another form of paralysis. So I packed our bags, filed my report with the governor, heavily edited to remove anything too disturbing, and prepared for the journey west. Behind us, the Johnson property sat empty, grass slowly reclaiming the foundations. Sometimes at night, travelers reported seeing lights moving across the ridge, hearing voices singing hymns in the darkness. But when investigated in daylight, nothing was ever found. Just empty land, empty foundations, and the lingering sense that something had happened here that should never be forgotten, no matter how much everyone wanted to forget. "I need to know something. If you found yourself in a situation like the wives, trapped between loyalty and horror, bound by something you couldn't control but couldn't excuse, what would you choose? Drop your answer below. I have a feeling it matters more than you think." The town 3 days west was called Providence, which should have been my first warning. Places named after divine intervention rarely earn those names through happy circumstances. It looked normal enough at first. 40 buildings, a church, a general store, families going about their business. But Jacob noticed it before I did, his eyes scanning the street with that too knowing gaze. "No children," he whispered. "There are families, couples, pregnant women, but no children anywhere." He was right. Every woman we saw was either childless or heavily pregnant. No toddlers playing in yards, no youngsters running errands, no teenagers causing trouble. Just this strange preponderance of expectant mothers and the careful, quiet men who attended them. We stopped at the general store, and I asked the proprietor about it casually, as if making conversation. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "We're a blessed community, stranger. The Lord provides for us in ways outsiders don't understand. Our children are raised in safety, away from the corruption of the world. Where? There's a nursery up on the hill, run by Sister Grace and her assistants. All our children stay there until they're old enough to understand their place in God's plan." I bought supplies and we left, my skin crawling with unspoken dread. Jacob's hand found mine as we walked back to our horses. "It's happening again," he said. Not the same way, but the same pattern. Isolation, control, devotion to something that demands sacrifice. We don't know that yet. Maybe it's just, stop lying to yourself. His voice was sharp. You know what this is. You can feel it. He was right. I could feel it. That same pressure in the air, that same sense of being watched by something that saw humans as resources rather than people. We rode up to the nursery that evening, approaching from the tree line so we could observe without being seen. It was a large building, well-maintained, with bars on the windows that someone had tried to disguise as decorative ironwork. Through those windows we saw them, dozens of children, all under 5 years old, sitting in perfect rows, their mouths moving in silent prayer. Behind them stood women in grey dresses, not the mothers, I realized, but attendants, watching, guiding, correcting any child who broke formation with swift, casual violence. They're teaching them, Jacob breathed, teaching them young, before they can question, before they can resist. In the center of the room stood a woman I assumed was Sister Grace. She was reading from a book, not the Bible, I noticed, but something else, something bound in leather that looked far too old. And above her, hanging from the ceiling like a grotesque chandelier, was something that made my stomach turn. At first I thought it was roots, some kind of organic growth that had broken through from above. Then I realized the roots were moving, pulsing like veins, and they terminated in small buds that looked disturbingly like mouths. It's feeding on them, Jacob said, his voice trembling. Not physically, not yet. But it's teaching them to offer themselves willingly, training them to see consumption as salvation. By the time they're old enough to leave the nursery, they'll be perfect offerings. We need to go to the authorities. Samuel, he gripped my arm. Look at the men by the door. I looked, saw the rifles, saw the careful way they watched the approaches, saw the devotion in their eyes. The whole town is in on it. The pregnant women, the absent children, they're all part of the system. Everyone who might object has already been converted or driven out. Then what do we do? He thought for a long moment. We burn it down. Jacob. Not the children, never the children. But that thing on the ceiling, Sister Grace's book, the nursery itself, it all needs to burn. Cut the head off this before it spreads beyond this town. I wanted to argue, wanted to say there was a legal way, a proper way, a civilized way to handle this. But I'd seen where proper procedures led. I'd seen how institutions failed when confronted with the impossible. Sometimes the only response to horror was fire. We waited until midnight. The town slept, or pretended to sleep, the sleep of the complicit. Jacob had fashioned torches from supplies we'd brought, and I'd found kerosene in the general store's stock. The nursery had guards, but they were watching for external threats, not for someone small enough to slip through the fence unnoticed. Jacob went in alone while I created a distraction, firing my pistol into the air and shouting about bandits. In the chaos that followed, Jacob reached the nursery, smashed the lock on the front door, and got the children moving. Fire, he screamed. Fire. Everyone out. The attendants tried to stop him, but children, when terrified, will run to anyone who offers safety. They flooded out the doors, into the arms of parents who were suddenly confronted with their own offspring, suddenly forced to choose between the thing they worshipped and the children they'd willingly given up. Most chose the children, not all. There were 3 couples who tried to return their kids to the burning building, who screamed that we were destroying God's plan. But enough chose humanity over devotion. The thing on the ceiling burned. I saw it writhing in the flames, saw it trying to escape through the cracks in the walls. Jacob was there with his torch, blocking every exit, making sure it couldn't spread to another location. Sister Grace came at him with a knife, screaming about blasphemy and divine punishment. He dodged, and I shot her. Not to kill, I'm not a murderer, whatever else I've become, but to stop her. The bullet took her in the shoulder, and she went down, still screaming, still calling for something to save her. Nothing answered. The nursery burned for hours, the flames visible for miles. By the time the governor's soldiers arrived 3 days later, summoned by families who'd suddenly remembered they valued their children more than their beliefs, there was nothing left but ash and questions. Questions I had no good answers for, because I'd destroyed evidence, burned potential witnesses, violated every principle of law I'd sworn to uphold. I'd become the thing I'd feared, someone who took justice into his own hands because he'd seen too much to trust the system. The governor reprimanded me privately, but thanked me publicly. "Sometimes," he said, "the right thing and the legal thing are different things. You did what was necessary." But necessary or not, it changed me. Burned away the last remnants of the person I'd been before the Johnson incident. I was no longer a magistrate who occasionally encountered darkness. I was someone who hunted it, someone who'd learned to recognize the signs and act before institutions could fail. Jacob became my partner in this. He had a gift for spotting the patterns, the tells, the small behaviors that indicated a community had accepted something terrible. Together, we stopped 3 more incidents over the next 2 years. Each time we tried to do it legally, properly. Each time circumstances forced us into darker methods. I'm not proud of what we became, but I'm not ashamed either, because every child we saved, every family we fractured to prevent worse fracturing, justified the cost to our souls. Walking Eyes visited us one last time, on the 2nd anniversary of the Johnson incident. She looked older, more tired, but her clouded eyes still saw too much. "You've become what you needed to become," she said. "Hunters of the corruption, burners of the rot. But Samuel, you need to understand something. Every time you do this, every time you take justice into your own hands, you come a little closer to becoming what you hunt." "I know." "Do you?" "Because I see it in you now. That willingness to sacrifice others for the greater good. That certainty that your judgment is correct. That belief that the ends justify the means." She leaned forward. "That's how it starts. That's how Elias started. Convinced that his prosperity helped the whole community, that his crimes served a higher purpose. I'm nothing like Elias. Not yet, but give it time. Give it enough cases where you have to choose between law and necessity, between individual rights and collective safety. See how long your principles survive." She left, and I tried to dismiss her warnings. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd think about the families we'd destroyed, the communities we'd fractured, the people we'd killed in the name of preventing greater killing. And I'd wonder if she was right. Jacob wondered too. I could see it in the way he looked at me sometimes, as if measuring me against some internal standard, checking to make sure I hadn't crossed some invisible line. "Samuel," he asked one night, "how do you know when to stop? When does preventing horror become creating it?" "I don't know. Maybe when the thing you're fighting stops being external and becomes internal. When you're no longer stopping monsters, but becoming one. And if that happens, then you need someone who loves you to stop you, someone who remembers who you were and can see who you're becoming." I looked at him directly. "That's your job, Jacob. Not to hunt with me, not to fight alongside me, but to know when it's time to stop me." He nodded solemnly. "I can do that." "Good, because I'm terrified that I won't be able to stop myself." We sat in silence after that, 2 people bound by shared trauma and shared purpose, trying to find a middle path between the law's inadequacy and vigilantism's corruption. I don't know if we succeeded. I don't know if success was even possible. But we tried. And maybe that's all anyone can do when confronted with the impossible. Try, fail, try again, and hope that the failures don't outweigh the successes. The Johnson property sits empty still, 20 years later as I write this. Jacob is a grown man now, 32 years old, with a wife and a daughter of his own. He's careful with his family in ways that pain me to watch. always questioning whether his love is healthy, always fearing he might become like his father or his mother, always struggling to find the balance between protection and control. His daughter is 7. Her name is Hope, and she's everything Jacob feared he could never create. Spontaneous, joyful, free. She knows nothing of what happened before she was born, and we've agreed to keep it that way until she's old enough to understand. But sometimes I catch Jacob watching her with that same desperate intensity I saw in his mother's final moments, and I have to remind him, she's not fragile. She doesn't need to be protected from everything. Sometimes the best protection is teaching strength, not building walls. He nods, adjusts, pulls back from the edge. But I can see how hard it is for him, how every instinct screams at him to gather her close, to keep her isolated, to ensure nothing can ever hurt her. The cycle wants to repeat. It always wants to repeat. That's the real horror. Not that evil exists, but that it's seductive, that it offers comfort and certainty, that it promises to protect what we love if we'll just surrender a little more control, sacrifice a little more autonomy, consume a little more completely. Walking Eyes died last year. Before she passed, she sent me a final message. The hunger sleeps but never dies. Teach others to recognize it. Teach them that protection without freedom is just another kind of prison. Teach them that love without respect is just another kind of consumption. I'm teaching. This account, this testimony is part of that teaching. Because the Johnson incident wasn't unique. It was just one manifestation of something that happens everywhere, in every community, whenever fear and love combine in the wrong proportions. It happens in families where parents can't let go. In communities where belonging requires absolute conformity. In relationships where love becomes possession. In institutions where protection becomes control. It's happening right now. Somewhere, to someone. And most people don't recognize it until they're already trapped in the collection, already part of the system, already too deep to escape without help. That's why I'm writing this. Not to frighten, but to inform. Not to condemn, but to warn. Because the first step toward prevention is recognition, and you can't recognize what you don't know to look for. The signs are always there. Isolation from outside influences, demand for absolute obedience, punishment disguised as protection, love expressed through control rather than freedom. If you see these things, in your own family, in your own relationships, in your own community, don't dismiss them, don't excuse them, don't participate in the comfortable lie that it's for their own good. Question, challenge, resist. Because the alternative is becoming part of the collection, and by the time you realize what you've become, you're too deeply integrated to break free. Martha Johnson still lives in town. She's 70 now, her hair white, her hands twisted with arthritis. She tends a small garden and speaks to no one. But sometimes I see her standing at the edge of the property, looking toward where the house once stood. I asked her once what she was thinking. I'm remembering, she said. Remembering what we were, what we became, what we did in the name of survival. And I'm making sure I never forget, because forgetting is how it happens again. That's the burden of survival. Remembering, carrying the weight of what happened, what you witnessed, what you participated in, and using that weight to prevent recurrence. It's exhausting. It's lonely. It's the price of awareness. But it's better than the alternative, better than forgetting, than minimizing, than letting the comfortable lies of "it wasn't that bad" or "it couldn't happen here" lull you back into the sleep of the complicit. So I remember. Jacob remembers. Martha remembers. And now if you've read this far, you remember too. That makes you responsible. That makes you a witness. That makes you someone who can't claim ignorance when you see the signs of hungry love beginning to consume. I don't know if that's a gift or a curse, maybe both, but it's yours now whether you wanted it or not. You've reached the end. But the story doesn't stop here. It continues wherever people mistake consumption for love, control for protection. If this resonated with you, if you recognized patterns you've seen, experiences you've had, don't keep it to yourself. This is the kind of understanding that needs to spread. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Soul Whispers so you don't miss what comes next, because there are more stories like this, more warnings, more lessons written in horror and hope. And the most important question, do you have someone in your life who loves you without consuming you? Someone who protects without controlling? If you do, you're lucky. If you don't, maybe it's time to recognize what you've been calling love. The Johnson family's horror ended with fire and revelation. Yours doesn't have to reach that point, but only if you're willing to see the signs before it's too late.